Good evening. It is my pleasure to call to order the January 11th, 2024 Finance and Facilities Committee meeting of the School District of Haverford Township. We will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I will turn the proceedings over to Mr. Testa to walk us through tonight's agenda.
Thank you very much. This evening we have Ken Matthews, who's going to present for us. I'll turn it over to Ken.
Good evening, everyone. Happy New Year. So we just have a couple of things tonight, so we'll start off. So Crabtree, who's the architect for Chatham Park and the middle school projects in Coopertown, they submitted over the last 2 months. We've been working with them kind of to revise their proposal for their fee for the projects. And what we've landed on that they've submitted a few weeks ago is a flat fee of 6.5% of the hard construction costs to do all the design for the project. So that includes civil engineer, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, geotech, kitchen consultant for Chatham. And this is well within reasonable range that we see on these type of projects. For example, we had an architect at Penn State, was around 7.5%. KCBA more recently for you all on the high school and the Linwood project was 7% fee. So this falls right within this range, so we would recommend proceeding forward. They've submitted a draft contract. We'll work out all the details with the district solicitor, Whistler Pearlstein. We'll get that done hopefully over the next month. So we would recommend approving that at the board meeting next week. Does anybody have any questions about their proposal or what's included? All right, great. So the second item on the agenda was, we've talked about it in the past a little bit, but wanted to get more into the weeds, so to speak, on the reason why the recommendation was to move forward with renovating Chatham and putting additions on it versus just building, why don't we just build a new building, similar to Linwood. So given some of the history, especially for some of the board members that were not there, so when we went through Linwood was a much different building. It was extremely spread out. The bones of the building, the exterior facade was absolutely in terrible shape. It had PCB caulk. It just had no insulation value. It was just horrible. So when you really looked at doing a renovation, it didn't make sense from that standpoint, even from a dollar and cents. And there was actually a little more property there. And after all the evaluation, you could fit a nice new building out in front. We still would meet all the zoning setback requirements, which I'll get to here in a minute for the comparison. So that's why the decision was made there. It was logical sense to build a new Linwood. Here at Chatham, the bones of the building, as they say, are in good shape. Back in 2006 and 2007, the facade of the building was replaced with a whole new window wall system. So, the insulation value and whatnot was increased. So there's a number of reasons for that. So let me just kind of walk through some of the highlights here. But we did ask Crabtree to say, okay, if you did put a building, what it would look like. So as you can see, in the background, you have the existing Chatham. So the white building would be kind of squeezing in what would be an appropriately sized 86,000 square foot building, similar to Linwood. Linwood's 87,000. You have about the same student population. Certainly, it would have a little room for growth as well. So, this would be, right now, he had it as a one-story addition, kind of the upper V part of it. So you could make that 2 or even 3 stories like Linwood. A couple things to point out. So from a zoning standpoint, now that you're pulling the building to the corner, so very similar to what was done at Manoa, there was a number of zoning ordinances variances that were required because you're not meeting any of the setbacks. Front yard setback is 100 feet, side yard is 75. So you're not meeting any of them, so you'd have to go through that. And certainly, it would be a drastic change just in the neighborhood with the homes being so close. So that's certainly a challenge. So for the cost of it, we put together some of the costs. So I took what Linwood cost was a little over 33 million all in for the project budget. Turner Construction, I used to work there, but they do billions of dollars of construction. They put out a national index of cost increases year to year. So from 2019 to now, you'd have about 20% escalation in construction. So if you take that, and you build what would be a new building here, you're getting upwards 40 to 44 million of what would be a total project budget to build a new building here.
Ken, real quick, did you just say it'd be a 20% increase from
Since-
2019?
A 20% increase since
Okay.
2019.
Wow.
That's correct. Yeah, you can, if you ever want to do it, you just Google Turner Index, and it just shows you year to year, and it has a kind of an index, and you can see how costs of construction have increased. So then by comparison, looking at the high school costs that were done, ironically, the high school, two additions together were about 28,000 square feet. Chatham Park, we're also looking at the additions add up to about 28,000 square feet. But the two projects together, Phase 1 and Phase 2, that were done over the last 2 years, all in with the hard, soft, and soft costs were about 20 million. So you escalate them a little less than 20% because it was 21 and 22, so about 15%, and you get up to a $23 million project. That would be the high school. It's not an exact apples to apples because there were some other renovations done, so you can't just put a square foot number on it. But between the two additions being similar to what's being considered here, it gets you in the ballpark, so to speak, as a comparison. One of the other things to point out, if you were to build a new building, you just spent a little over $5 million upgrading Chatham Park with all the HVAC, lighting. If you build a new building, you need to keep the existing building operational, so you really need new equipment. There's probably some level of things you could salvage, but you probably, a lot of that money would just have been used over the last few years. So that's one other thing to point out if you did do a new building. Certainly, a building configuration, you're a little bit limited because you can see how the building is squeezed on the site. Whether you do a new building or renovate existing, parking lots have to be upgraded. They have to be, we need about 60-ish additional spots based to meet current zoning ordinances in the township. Certainly, we can add, whether it's you went new or existing, you can add electrical vehicle charging stations. So that's easily done. And then, of course, with building a new school, you would have no field usage, similar to Linwood, for that, call it 2-year period until the old building was demolished and then new fields could be built back in its place. So certainly with new construction, you're getting everything, upgraded to current codes. The building certainly would be a little bit more energy efficient just because of the exterior envelope being brand new and up to current codes. So those are some of the pros and cons of the new building. So, the pros and cons of the renovation and additions, as you can see here, you're basically keeping the building where it is. Yes, you have a little addition in front and a little in the back, but you're really not changing much. The fields are all kept intact. There's one small playground we may have to just move over, but that's not a big deal at all. Again, the parking lot needs to be upgraded regardless. So the big thing with this renovation addition is the cost difference. So you look at a new building, you're in the $40+ million range. If you do this renovation and addition, and we're in the process now of doing a detailed cost estimate, so we don't have that quite yet based on the schematic design to date. But for a total project budget, you're in the range of 20 to 28 million total versus a new building, which would be $12+ million more. And you get the benefit of keeping all the systems you just spent $5 million on. You're using them, they're brand new. brand new systems in the building, new boiler, chiller, and infrastructure, and all new LED lighting. There is a little zoning relief that will be needed for this, but it's fairly insignificant, so we don't see that as a real bump in the road. And again, the layout of this building works very well for the programming of the school. It honestly, it lays out the way the architect's done it. You kind of have your central core of music, library, gym, all in the one area. You have the nice classroom wing. Each class section is nicely grouped together. So it works out well from that standpoint.
Ken, one question I have is, yeah, it makes sense financially. But last meeting, when they were kind of giving their estimates around timeline, it seems like at this point in time, obviously, we can't have a crystal ball and know for sure, but it looks like it's only next year's school year that would be disrupted with the students in the building at the time of construction. Is that still what the estimate is, given the 2 summers on the back end
Sure.
of that?
Yeah, as of right now, the schedule would be that the goal would be to finish for next summer 2025. So it would just be the 1 year interrupted. So, certainly if you build a new building, you're isolated and really you're just, it's not affecting anything. But, we're going to go through and do some very smart phasing to try and keep things as separated as possible. So there will be some interruption, but we'll work hard to keep it minimal. Let's see. Just a couple other minor things. So with the renovations, they don't affect any current field use. So they're really kind of tight to the building. Again, you take a little bit of the playground space in the back, but it doesn't really affect any field use. And that's, really a lot of the pros and cons, but, it is a significant cost difference. And I think that's why, the recommendation is to move forward with the renovations and additions for all those reasons. So hopefully that helps to better kind of quantify it for everyone. It's not just $1 million or $2 million, it's significant.
I had a question. Thank you for the analysis. Is there anything like building lifespan that, that a newer building would have a
No, that's a great
longevity?
question. Because we just upgraded all the systems, brand new boiler, brand new chiller, so 1 or 2 years you'll have of use. So really outside of that, we're putting on a brand new roof. So the windows are certainly a little more aged, but they can last a very long time. So a new building, you probably would get a little bit of a longer life on certain things, but overall, I would say it's fairly insignificant, generally speaking.
Thank you.
Any other comments or discussion? I think, yeah, this was really helpful. I think the last meeting, it was a big number, right? Like 20-some million dollars of construction cost, and being able to put that in perspective.
Sure.
And to appreciate the asset in the school that we have now, the investment that we've made, the way that it works for that school community, the layout, the amenities it has, and that a project could expand it and refresh it for significantly less than, a whole new building without all of that. I think it was good just to lay out those options, and it is consistent with discussions I've been a part of over the years. Like you said, when we walked through Linwood and saw its functional challenges, and, the condition of the window walls and the layout of the building, right? Like there was just multiple
2 separate
problems to
basements.
overcome.
Yeah.
But yeah, you don't have that same thing at Chatham. Chatham has wish lists, like wouldn't it be great if this were bigger or this was laid out differently, but a lot of good things to build upon there, and to be able to do it more efficiently seems like continues to reaffirm the message that we've had, and the decision in the road that we're working toward.
Thank you for the presentation also, and for spelling out the the cost. That was very helpful because the number was like a sticker shock when I heard it. But
Yes.
I mean, that's a huge differential because I think if I recall with Linwood, it was only going to be saving like, I don't know, 3 to 5 million to.
But yes, it wasn't as significant,
It
you're
was,
correct.
and we had, I think, I remember the architect saying at the time, you have no idea, like, you think it's 3 million savings, but once you start ripping down, you don't know what you're renovating, you don't know what you're gonna find, and that 3 million.
Could get worse, that's right, and spend a lot
So
more
I was
money.
surprised, so I appreciate the numbers. I just had a question, parking, did you say you'll have 60?
So right now, there's about 60-ish parking spots. There's a
Okay.
calculation between employees and square foot of the building that the township does. So you need, it's somewhere 110-ish spots. We
Okay.
have to hone in on the exact number, but there's only 60 or so now. So just because we're doing such a massive renovation, the township code kicks in and you have to meet those requirements. So the parking lot out front that you see there isn't quite big enough. So the design team came up with the idea to do a smaller kind of lot in the back. It's dead space anyway. It's not like it's field space or play space. So that could fit in very well, and then that could be some employee parking, and then you'd have the front drop-off area. It separates the drop-off and the buses, just makes it for a lot better circulation.
No, I'm glad to see that. That was just my one complaint about being a Linwood parent. I still wish there was more parking, and if you ever
Yeah, that
go to Linwood
increased.
at pickup time, you'll see the horrors of, it's tight, so that's good if you're factoring. More parking, always better. That's
Yes,
fine.
for sure.
I have a question.
Sure.
Bridget mentioned that there were like wish list items, and so we're beyond that point, right? So the wish list items have been considered?
So great question. So there's still items, for example, on the inside, a lot of the existing classrooms is a relatively light touch upgrade, I'll say. The old blackboards are getting removed, new whiteboards. You're in the process actually now of doing a lot of new technology. So that will continue. So there will be potential upgrades. So we'll put them in as add alternates to the project, similar to what was done at Linwood, upgrade the flooring. We'll put in there in the bids, what's an add alternate to put in terrazzo flooring? What's an add alternate to take the classrooms from VCT to a newer flooring? So there are some opportunities for some of those kind of wish list type items. But generally, the goal was to meet the programming there was a lot of spatial deficiencies. Music is, kind of tucked in on the stage. The gym's very small. So a lot of those, I wouldn't say wish list, that's like base needs to meet the program for the building. All the special ed classes and all those various programs. So there'll be an opportunity for some other upgrades, for sure.
And speaking of special ed, so we do have some special education stakeholders that will be involved in that part of the process?
Yes, so
that
there's
correct?
the whole team between the principal and, music, art, each grade level. So Jabari, the principal, will have an executive team, for lack of a better term, that will meet with the architectural team, go through the details of the programming, and get into the weeds of casework and cabinets and drawers or doors and all those little details.
Little unless you are concerned about special education spaces. So
so
there are
very
stakeholders
important.
from special education? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Okay. They're my most important group. Okay, just asking.
What is the gym space like for what's it like in the art room?
Yeah, I was just asking because we're talking about renovations, and when you're renovating existing space, it's hard to see what the future need could be, or even a space that wasn't necessarily designed originally to have special education integrated, as in the last presentation was kind of mentioned. So that's kind of what I was thinking about, because if you end up needing to add something, then that could be significant more cost, right?
Sure.
I mean,
Well, I think the additions really helped create all those programming spaces that are needed,
Yeah.
X number of special ed,
Yeah.
music, et
No,
cetera.
the only reason I asked about that is because we talked about the music, we talked about the classrooms, we talked about the K1, the K2. And so all of those needs are already met, right? And so
Right.
I'm just thinking, like, are there sensory
Very good
classrooms?
point.
Are there going to be additional spaces? Because when you add another 2,000 square feet to the lunchroom, there are going to be some special education students eating in their regular classrooms. So are those needs already being considered? But thank you so much. My question's been answered.
I have a question just about the overall site layout with new parking lot that's being put in over there. Obviously, the traffic volumes going to the school shouldn't change because it's the same school.
Same student, right?
But circulation patterns might. And I'm wondering, I believe back years ago, there used to be a temporary one-way on one of the roads there around Chatham. There's temporary one-way coming, I want to say, it's upside down, but I guess if you want to look at it from this point, coming down on the road off to the right there, I believe it's actually coming north.
I think it went up.
Yeah, I think it went, well, it went one of the directions. I forget which one, but will the township require any kind of assessment? Because I know that right now, just being a Chatham parent, that is a major, it's a busy area, and there are kids running to cars and everything. So I'm just curious if there'll be any consideration for that, if the township will ask it, or if we will do anything about it.
Well, yeah, I mean, some of the requirements of this will be that, whether it's a full-blown traffic study, but there will be a level of traffic evaluation that they'll require.
And township obviously will be involved with that. I'm
Correct.
assuming
Yes, we'll have to go through planning and zoning
Okay.
for this project.
You mentioned in the potential for the new building that there would be expected zoning issues. Are there any expected zoning issues for the current renovations? Obviously, again, no crystal ball, but like what?
Yes, no, there are a few, but they're fairly minor. Building coverage, we're over the percentage, it's either 20 or 30%, building coverage on the site. Impervious surface, but with all the new stormwater underground management, we should be able to handle most of that. And I believe those are really the only ones, because we meet all the setbacks. So there were just a few, but they weren't anything that I would say would be a challenge, with the township. We're certainly putting the building up front is just a fairly significant change that could be a lot more difficult, but nothing of significance.
So could you remind us again what the next steps are? This was a good response to some questions last time, but yeah, where are we in terms
Just
of?
met today, so.
Okay.
Yeah, so the architect continues working. They're kind of getting more to a construction level set of plans. We'll review them internally, then they're getting them to a third-party cost estimator. That's going to do this, 10 to 15 page, very detailed cost estimate based on that. We'll get that probably in about 3 to 4 weeks. We'll need to go through that in detail, make sure they've captured everything, or did they capture too much, so that we can get to an appropriate dollar value that we feel everybody's comfortable with. Come back and present that to you all at the March meeting. And that kind of will set the project budget. And I know Dr. Rushi will have Jamie back again to talk about the finances and whatnot. So, but they'll keep working. They'll have these meetings with the principal and his team to really hone in on a lot of those other details. So the process will really continue. And then the architect, once that budget is set, will do another cost estimate at about, call it 75, 80% drawing completion. And they'll, depending on how that comes back, if they're way over budget, then they're going to need to do redesign at their expense to pull the project back in within budget. And certainly, of course, we'll work with them in that. So the important thing, next milestone for the board is really setting the project budget. That's really the key component. And then the goal would be to go out to bid. Right now, we'll just say somewhere April to June, just depending on how they're saying they're on track for April, but I say always am cautiously optimistic. We'll see how that goes, but there's no reason really to do another cost estimate at the completion of the documents, because the bid market will tell you what the cost of the building is.
Yep.
So,
What kind of approvals are needed? I mean, that's a very aggressive schedule. I mean, we're looking to break ground by the summer. What are some of the,
so Dave, practically speaking, if, let's just say the project's awarded in June, you're really not going to we'll call it break ground or do whatever level of renovations realistically till later in the summer.
Yeah.
By the time you get a contractor on board, get submittals in, release material. So there's probably not going to be a lot of work done this summer. There's some abatement to do and some other things we'll go through. In the next month, we'll really get into the detailed phasing of the project, how this will be done, and then we'll see what we can accomplish this summer. But, the goal would be to build the additions over the next school year, get them done, then there'll be some shifting around of folks inside the building and then continue on with the renovations.
just curious, what are some of the critical path items that we'll need approvals for?
So we'll go to zoning first. The goal would be to do that probably in March or April. Then we go to planning for the land development submission. That would be, again, probably April, May, June. We would anticipate only a couple meetings for each of them. And they meet twice a month, so really by July, we should have.
So it'd be out to bid before approvals? Okay.
Yeah, it might be close to the same time, but it could be, and I don't anticipate any significant changes that would come out of the planning that would affect the bids.
Okay.
All right, thanks so much.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks again, Ken.
Next on the agenda, we have an initial draft of the 2024-25 capital projects. Primarily, that would occur starting in the summer of 2024. So I had met with JR to kind of go over what he thought priority projects should be for this coming year. And we talked about priorities and narrowed down to come to a grand total this year of $1.7 million, a little bit lower than what we had done in previous years. If you just start from the top of the report, district-wide, he looks at concrete, any door replacement, and carpet replacements throughout the district. So he kind of sets aside that money just to use where needed. So it may not be all of it, but kind of just sets a placeholder for those important items. At the high school level, we're looking at some new cafe tables for the cafeteria and refinishing the gym floor. At your middle school, looking for a phys ed renovation of Gym D. So that's just kind of like an overall refresh of that space. And two items related to safety, it would be the retaining walls and stair tread replacement within the building. At Chestnut Wall, looking at an energy efficiency project that would take care of your boiler replacement, hot water, your oil tank removal, and some duct insulation. And again, based on how he prices those projects, it could be that it goes out to bid unless it's on a state contract. So that would kind of be driven by the vendor that we would be using. And then at the maintenance and transportation building, extending some of the street lighting down the driveway. So just to give them a better sight line during the hours when it is a little bit darker.
It's dark when they pull out in the morning.
Yes, still waiting for that sun to come up.
I have a question.
Yes.
Who is JR?
I'm sorry. So JR is our director of facilities. He could not be here this evening, so he and I met just to kind of go over these items. So you will see JR at a future meeting, definitely.
All right, thank you for that.
Sure thing.
It just sounds so ominous. It's like JR, he's making this up, you know? Why not me? LL, we can do that.
I have a question about, when I was looking through this earlier, the phys ed renovation at the middle school. I'm assuming, I can't remember all the, Gym D is the older gym, I think on the side of the school, because you could tell the new ones at the back, and I didn't know their numbering. But just, it's a very high price, seeing that you're refinishing the gym floor in the high school for $42,000, so I would assume you'd be refinishing the floor there. What else is going into the renovation to, make it over pushing $500,000. What else
So
is that?
it's going to consist of some redoing the lighting in there, doing some painting as well. So it's just like an overall refresh of that space. And I can get more detail.
Yeah,
like a
that
line
still
item.
seems lighting and, yeah, I would like, if possible, to have more details on that. Thank you.
And I know the board is planning to do a tour at the end of the month to see the middle school cafeteria. Maybe we can swing by Gym D and see what's needed in there.
Okay. And one other item that I don't have listed, but we are looking at is the flooring in this building in the lower level. So we're looking at a replacement of the flooring based on some water that is taken on in the floor based on the water table. So depending on what that looks like, it could be part of the capital projects or it could be part of the regular operating budget for facilities. It would just be dependent upon the total cost of that work.
And two comments. One, I would say the M&T street lighting could be, and that's Maintenance and Transportation Building where JR is headquartered. That street lighting could be flagged as safety too. I think, you know, that's
Absolutely.
definitely an issue there. And then could you just remind us and the public that these capital funds come from surplus that we had set aside and reserved for this purpose to be able to invest in these kinds of improvements?
Yes. So in order to help smooth fluctuations in the budget, when there are years where there is an excess of revenue over expenditures, the board can decide each fiscal year to put some of those funds into a capital reserve. So we do have in the general fund a line item for these types of projects that you can make these one-time, and that's really what it is for. It's for these one-time projects. You don't want to use it for recurring expenses. That should be part of your regular budget on an annual basis.
I had a question on the Chestnut Wald. So it says energy efficiency. Can you give us an idea of what the ROI on that, or?
I can get that information for you.
Okay. And was that a conversion from oil to different fuel?
I believe so, because he's having the tank removed. I don't think it's a replacement of, I think it is to convert, but I can find that out as well.
Thank you.
Chestnut Wald is now nearing 20 years old, right?
Wow.
20, probably 17 years, was it? I'm thinking I had
Yeah.
I had a toddler when it was under construction a block from my house, so.
Yeah, about that.
Yeah, so in terms of life cycle, it probably explains why some of these big ticket items are coming up to be considered for replacement and upgrade.
Yeah, I guess just to follow up on that, the boiler needed to be replaced, or it was an energy efficient? I assume there was some kind of conversion.
Yep, I'll get that information, and follow up.
And I believe all of the others have been at the elementary buildings.
Okay.
I think we haven't heard the same issues with Chestnut Wald's boiler like we were hearing what was happening at the middle school, right? When that, so yeah, get some more information on
Absolutely.
the timing of it. Maybe that was the chiller at the middle school. There was some big equipment with a crane that I remember.
That was the chiller with the crane.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so I will move on to item D. This is your December 2023 budget summary reports. And I also included this time around just kind of like a little FAQ on what the board reports are and just some highlights. And if you have any further questions, certainly you can let me know. But I figure even for our existing board members and new board members, this might be just a good spot to get some information that relates to the expenditure reports. Thank you. So in your reports, your revenues obviously are your sources and structure of the general fund revenue. So when you look at your revenues, you have three different functions that we rely on. So 6,000 being our local sources, which you'll see in the reports. The largest being your taxes levied. So that's about 76.5% of the revenue budget that we have for this year. And the majority of your collections are realized from July through September. So you would see a spike in the revenue during those months. Then it does start to taper off with most of the collections being completed by the end of December. Any of those taxes that are left over are considered delinquent taxes, and they get sent to the county for further collection. And also the county, as they collect it, they take a standard fee of 5% off that. And that is common for what the county does for all the districts in Delaware County. Even if you use, because they just sent out a letter, even if you use a private collection company, they still want their 5%. That's something that they've kind of caught on, that districts are using outside collection agencies for whatever reason. Interest income, obviously, we're seeing a more favorable current investment in this market. There was a point where you didn't even really budget interest income because it was so minuscule at the time. And then revenues from your IUs. So because the revenue that we get, even though it's federal revenue, it flows through the Delaware County Intermediate Unit to the district. And as we have those expenditures, we remit that to the IU, and then we are paid for those reimbursement of those services. And then in the 7,000 series, that's your state sources. So there's a payment schedule that the state follows once they do approve their budget that gives us the subsidies for basic ed, special ed, transportation, and then any other state grants that fall in there. And as you can see, your basic ed subsidy is equal to your 14-15 subsidy plus the fair share for additional funds that the state does put into the program. And on the special ed side, it goes back to the 2013-14 subsidy that you received, and then any additional funds that are put in. So that is kind of important because that can really sway your revenues based on your share of the pie, as they refer to it, for funding for all the schools in Pennsylvania. And then your transportation subsidy based on a calculation of miles traveled, students that are assigned to that bus. So there's a whole calculation that they look at for that as well. Even though we do pay the Social Security and PSERS contributions, we do get 50% reimbursement from the state for those items. And that's based on, 50% is the minimum you'll get, and it's based on your market value aid ratio. So because we have a higher market value aid ratio, we do get just the minimum 50%. On the federal source side, so that's where all your title programs are, monies that we've received during COVID, the CARES Act, the American Rescue Plan. That, again, is money that we receive, and it's to be spent on a specific purpose. So each of those grants, whether they're title grants, have specific guidelines for spending those funds in an appropriate manner. And then we also have funds that we receive for medical access reimbursements. So any students that are Medicaid eligible that we provide services to, there's a fee that we get for each of those students. And there's, of course, reporting that goes along with that, just to make sure that we are compliant and we get the funds that we are due. On the expenditure side, expenditures are made up of, there's multi-components that make up the expenditures. The most important being your function. So is it instruction? Is it support services? Is it operation of non-instructional services, facilities acquisitions, or other financing uses? So your instruction, again, is just expenditures that are related to what it takes to deliver instruction in the classroom. Support services is your business office, your technology, your guidance, all those services that aren't directly in the classroom but do support the instruction that students receive. Your Function 3000, your non-instructional services, so that's your athletics, your activities, any kind of community-based costs that we incur. And then Function 5000 are your other expenditures and financing uses. So any debt that we take on, that's your principal and interest, primarily is what's going through that function. What comes off of that then is your object. So within those areas, where am I spending the dollars? Is it in salaries, other professional services, rent, utilities? So object 100 is your salaries and wages, 200 are your benefits, so that's beyond, it's including your health benefits, your PSERS, any tuition reimbursement that an employee may receive. And then your object 300 are your purchased professional and technical services. So as you can see there, it's architects, engineers, services that we receive through the IU will reside in that object category. 400 is your purchased property services. So this is primarily your utilities is what you're going to see flow through this area. Any repairs and maintenance that's done by staff outside of the district. 500 are your other purchase services. So this is where you're going to see any tuition that we pay for a student to be educated outside of the district, your cyber and charter schools, and also property and liability insurance fall in that category. Object 600 are your supplies. Not much to say there. It's all of your consumables, your textbooks, your paper. Object 700 is your property. So any capital assets that we take on, any expenditures that exceed our capital asset threshold, that has a life more than one fiscal year, you're going to see reside in that category. And then 800 and 900 is where your debt service payments reside. So your interest in 800 and your principal payments in object 900. And that's just a brief overview, just to kind of give everybody a little background on where it resides. So there is a structure that we follow with PDE, and those functions and objects do come out of that chart of accounts.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, that this is consistent with the state ledger of accounts, and so our reporting is in a line with what we need to do and with other districts.
Yes, and especially when we do our annual financial report at the end of the year, if we're not using the right codes, it's going to kick out, and so we have to make sure we're conforming whatever we do to PDE's chart of accounts.
I just had a question. How would you flag anything that's something, or do you feel comfortable with the year-to-date percentage? Because I look at it just naively and I see a large, variance. Some things are like almost 100%, some are 30.
On the expenditure side?
Well,
Or-
on the I'm looking at the expenditures now. Is there any, how would we know that there's a concern about overspending or unders? Do we have a history, or do you just kind of keep it in your head and?
So I will take a look at I think it's the 400. So that's some of the equipment that we lease, some of the technology that we do lease. So that, I believe that's part of what's in there. We did purchase some extra items, but part of that does get offset by a technology fee that the students do pay. So while that resides in the revenue, the expenditure resides on the other side. So some of it will net out at the end of the year as we make those collections.
I guess my question is just how would we know there's a red flag somewhere?
So I'll look at this on a monthly basis and then take this report and drill down deeper into it, just to make sure there are no
Unusual.
any unusual items. Was there any duplication of efforts in there, just to double check that?
I think 700 has a couple that are over 100 in the property category. So I'd same question as Dr. Shelton did. Yeah, a couple of those look like they've already been and maybe it was just something that's already been done that won't be needed again, and it went a bit over. But yeah, I'm kind of looking for some more details onto what precisely we are there and how much more we can anticipate spending.
Okay, and I'll check on that one, because I know we purchased the cameras for the buses and we had set aside contingency dollars to do that. So it may just be a need to reclass some of that contingency funding against that expense, but I'll double check that as well.
All right, thanks.
So thank you. I think that got through our 4 agenda items, and so now we have an opportunity for public comment if there's any. Seeing none, we will adjourn the Finance and Facility Committee meeting and resume momentarily with the next one. So we'll